In football, the safety position is the last line of defense. In safety, personal protective equipment, or PPE, is the last line of defense between workers and workplace hazards. Now, you might think of it as the first line of defense, but it isn't. We do not rely on PPE alone to keep workers safe. Why not? Because eliminating a hazard altogether is always a better solution than relying on just PPE. To be effective, PPE has to be used in conjunction with guards, engineering controls, and safe work practices. An engineering control is a design that eliminates a hazard. An example is a spray booth for spray painting, which removes the harmful vapors from the painter's breathing zone. A safe work practice or work practice control is a way of doing the work that reduces but does not eliminate the hazard. Some examples are vacuuming dust instead of sweeping, or keeping chemical containers closed when not in use. It's important to establish good work practices before you rely on PPE to protect your workers. Substituting less hazardous materials is another good technique. When you can't eliminate a hazard through engineering controls, or when work practice controls don't fully protect the worker, then PPE will be necessary. There is a wide range of PPE and a wide range of jobs for which it is appropriate. Gloves, respirators, steel-toed shoes, aprons, safety glasses, chemical splash goggles. These are all examples of PPE which are necessary for certain jobs. This video can't cover all of them individually, but we will cover the basic duties of employers when it comes to PPE. We'll show you, the employer, how to make a PPE hazard assessment and select the right PPE and make sure it's worn properly. And remember, PPE doesn't help anyone unless it is worn and worn properly. TOSHA standards on PPE require the employer to do the following. Perform a hazard assessment of the workplace to identify and control physical and health hazards. Identify and provide appropriate PPE based on the hazard assessment. Train employees in the proper use and care of PPE. Replace worn or damaged equipment, and review the PPE program periodically to update and evaluate the effectiveness of the program. There are some general guidelines for assessing the hand, foot, head, eye, and face hazards found in an occupational setting, and for matching the PPE to the particular hazards. These guidelines can be found in the OSHA standards for general industry. They're in Appendix B, Subpart I. But let's be clear, the standards are mandatory rules with which you must comply. However, Appendix B, Subpart I contains some non-mandatory guidelines to help you with PPE selection. The first step is to conduct a walkthrough survey of the areas in question. The purpose of the survey is to identify sources of hazards to workers. Watch the employee perform the job and look for hazards at each step. It may be helpful to videotape or photograph the worker performing the job. Consider these basic hazard categories. Impact. Consider sources of motion, i.e. machinery or processes where any movement of tools, machine elements, or particles could exist, or movement of personnel that could result in collision with stationary objects. Also, the potential for sources of falling objects or dropping objects. Penetration. Look for sources of sharp objects which might pierce the feet or cut the hands. Compression or rollover. There may be sources of rolling or pinching objects which could crush the feet. We concentrate on the feet because there is no PPE to prevent compression or pinching of the hands or other body parts. Chemical. Locate any employees working with any chemicals or dust. Heat. Look for sources of high temperatures that could result in burns, eye injury, or ignition of protective equipment. Light. Optical radiation. Don't forget sources of light radiation, i.e. welding, brazing, cutting, furnaces, heat treating, high intensity lights, etc. biological, sources of needle sticks or other potential for transfer of body fluids. These hazards can expose workers to serious long-term illnesses. A good survey is an exercise in detective work. Your goal is to consider not only the obvious hazards you can easily see, but also the ones that are not readily apparent. Remember, the goal is to determine if PPE could prevent injury to the employee. Here are some helpful questions to ask in your detective work. What can go wrong? How could it happen? How likely is it that the hazard will occur? What are the consequences? It's important to get the folks on the floor involved in this process. They're the experts and they have the best understanding of the job. They know what's dangerous and they know the shortcuts people take. The next step is to identify the part of the body that could be affected at each job. Eyes, face, foot, head, hands, body, hearing, lungs and respiratory system, etc. must be protected. When you do your assessment, be sure and explain to your employees that you're studying the job, not checking up on their performance. Make them part of the whole assessment process. Remember, no safety program can succeed with only one participant. Once you have the data from your walk-around, you have to estimate the potential for injuries or illnesses at each job. Review each of the 7 basic hazards we discussed to determine the type of risk involved, the level of risk, and the seriousness of the potential injury or illness from each of the hazards you found. Then you make your PPE selections. Don't forget that some employees may be exposed to several hazards at once. Here's an example of what to look for a specific job. In this job, the employee has to load the plywood into a CNC routing machine for cutting. Then remove the cut pieces and the waste, clean the sawdust from the table, and begin again. What hazards is the employee exposed to while doing this job? The noise level is above 85 decibels, so he's going to need hearing protection. Wood particles could impact the eyes, so he's going to need eye protection. What about the hands? The potential for wood splinters when handling the waste or the parts is high. He'll need hand protection. Don't forget to check your OSHA 300 logs and look for the types of injuries you've been having. This can help you prioritize what area of the facility to assess first. It might even give you some clues as to what you're going to need to correct. For example, if the grinding area has been having a lot of eye injuries, the employees may not be wearing their eye protection. Remember to look at the jobs that are only done once in a while, like the special cleaning jobs, or going into confined spaces and so forth, because those jobs will have hazards too. After you've looked at all those tasks your folks do, ask yourself, what can we do to eliminate the hazards? After you've substituted materials, replaced equipment, engineered out problems, and put administrative controls in place, and you still have hazards, then you look to PPE. Once you've determined that you do need PPE, it is the employer's responsibility to make sure you select the right kind for the hazard. OSHA requires certain types of PPE to meet ANSI standards. ANSI, by the way, stands for American National Standards Institute. For example, eye and face protection must meet ANSI Z87.1-1989. Head protection must meet ANSI Z89.1-1986. Foot protection has to meet ANSI Z41.1-1991. For hand protection, OSHA requires that employers select appropriate gloves for the hazard. A glove selection table provided by vendors can be a big help. Ask vendors, do research. Ask other safety professionals in your area. You know the drill, measure twice, cut once. You want to make sure you get your PPE selection right on the front end. Note that before any employee may wear a respirator, a medical evaluation by a licensed professional healthcare provider is always required. There are other specific requirements for other types of PPE in the OSHA standards. Respiratory protection is 1910.134. Eye and face is 1910.133. Hearing protection is in 1910.95 and so forth. You can find these requirements on the OSHA website, and you can call the nearest TOSHA consultative office for more information. You don't even have to tell them what company you're with. Just ask the question and get the answer. We'll show you those numbers again at the end of this video. If employees bring their own PPE, employers are still responsible to assure that that PPE is adequate, and that includes maintenance, cleaning, and sanitation if necessary. So as we've seen, it's not enough to just say PPE is needed. The employer has the responsibility to select the right kind. Okay, you've assessed the workplace. You've eliminated as many hazards as possible through material substitution, engineering controls, and administrative controls. And you've selected the appropriate PPE. Now, your employees have to be trained on the proper use and care of the PPE. The training must include what PPE is necessary, when to use the PPE, how to don, doff, and adjust PPE. That means put it on, take it off, and make it fit right. The limitations of the PPE, proper care of the PPE, maintenance, useful life, and disposal of PPE. This information will be in the manufacturer's literature that comes with the PPE when you purchase it. Employers have to document that PPE training has occurred by preparing a written certification that shows the name of the employee trained, the date of the training, and the subject of the training. And that document must be identified as the PPE training certification, and it must be available if a TOSHA inspector asks to see it. And make sure the employees understand the training by having them demonstrate to you that they can properly wear the PPE. In other words, have them show you they can put it on, take it off, and adjust it correctly. This needs to happen before the employee is allowed to go perform the work that requires the PPE. Employers need to periodically review, update, and evaluate the effectiveness of the program. And retrain employees whenever there is a change in the workplace, like new machines or workstations, or in the PPE that would require updated information. Employees also have to be retrained if they demonstrate a lack of understanding, such as not wearing their PPE properly or not wearing it when they should. Employers are required to maintain PPE and replace worn or damaged PPE. How do employers know when something is worn out? Check it, audit, evaluate, ask around. Make sure the employees know to turn in damaged or worn out PPE. That's where the training comes in. Train them so they know what to look for. Get everyone involved. We've talked about periodically reviewing and evaluating several times in this video. Well, just how often is periodically? Well, it's as often as it takes. It should be an ongoing process. Some safety programs like HAZCOM require annual retraining, and that might be a good time to review your PPE program as well. Always be on the lookout for people not wearing PPE or wearing it improperly. Make sure employees understand that PPE is for their protection, so they'll choose to do the right thing. Wear the PPE properly. If there's a problem with the PPE, it doesn't fit right, or it doesn't protect like you thought it would, change it. That's what reviewing, updating, and evaluating is all about. Making sure the PPE works as intended, to protect the people. The success of your PPE program depends on the level of management commitment. If management doesn't take PPE seriously, the employees always know it. Evaluating, updating, and reviewing your program will go a long way toward communicating management's commitment to the employees. In the last few years, many Tennessee companies have been cited by TOSHA for not having written certification of their PPE hazard assessments. So make sure you've done the work and have the certification on hand. OSHA says your written certification must include the following: the identity of the workplace you evaluated, the name of the person who did the assessment, the date the assessment was done, and the document has to be identified as the PPE Hazard Assessment Certification. So let's review the employer's PPE responsibilities. Employers need to perform a PPE hazard assessment. You use that assessment to identify and provide the proper PPE. Train your employees on proper use and care of PPE. Replace worn or damaged PPE. And review the program periodically. And remember, you must have written certification of your PPE hazard assessment available if an inspector asks. Remember, we don't rely on PPE alone to keep our employees safe. Minimizing or eliminating the hazard is always the first line of defense. PPE, that's the last line of defense between injury and illness in the workplace. So let's eliminate those hazards before they have a chance to do us any harm.